When we think about communication, most of us assume that speaking is the core of influence. The louder the voice, the sharper the words, the greater the impact, or at least that's the illusion. But if you observe carefully, in almost every meaningful human interaction, it is not the speaker who holds the most power, it is the one who listens. And not just casually, not just with a polite nod while waiting for their turn to talk, but with a deep and deliberate attention. That kind of listening is rare, and because it is rare, it is immensely powerful. Think about the last time someone truly listened to you. Not with their phone in their hand, not half absorbed in their own thoughts, not formulating a clever response while you were still speaking, but actually listened. They locked onto your words, your tone, your pauses, even the emotion behind what you were saying. In that moment, you probably felt respected, you felt like you mattered, and that experience left a lasting impression on you, whether or not you realized it. That is the essence of intentional listening. It transforms silence into a kind of invisible authority. Why is that? Psychologically, we are wired to crave recognition. We want to be acknowledged, to have our existence validated. When someone listens deeply, they are essentially saying, you exist. What you think and feel is real, and it matters. And once a person feels seen in that way, they become far more open to influence. They're more likely to trust you, to respect you, and even to follow your lead. That's the paradox. By giving away your attention, you gain credibility and power. Now, it's easy to dismiss this as a simple social skill, but it is much more than that. Listening functions almost like a mirror. It reflects back to people not only their words, but also their sense of self. If you reflect carefully, people reorganize their own thoughts in the process of being listened to. You've probably noticed this in conversations. Someone starts speaking in a chaotic, scattered way, but because you remain patient and attentive, their words begin to organize themselves. They clarify their own ideas, often arriving at insights they didn't even know they had until they said them aloud. What? In that sense, a good listener is not passive at all. They are actively shaping the outcome of the interaction, simply by holding space for it to unfold. This is why, in negotiations, in leadership, and even in therapy, listening is the decisive factor. A leader who dominates the conversation with speeches may inspire in the short term, but a leader who listens builds loyalty that endures. A negotiator who pushes their agenda risks resistance, but a negotiator who listens uncovers hidden motivations, and those motivations are the real leverage. And a therapist who listens doesn't just collect information, they provide the client with a mirror in which they can finally see themselves clearly. That is silent influence, and it is far stronger than the force of words alone. But let's not romanticize listening as if it were easy. To listen with intention is difficult. It requires setting aside your ego. The part of you that craves to be heard, that wants to display intelligence, that wants to win. To listen is to surrender that impulse, at least temporarily, and instead devote yourself entirely to the other person's reality. That is uncomfortable because it feels like giving up control, but in truth, it is the opposite. By stepping back, you create an opening where authentic communication can emerge, and that authenticity gives you more influence than any carefully constructed argument could. Philosophically, you could say that listening is an act of humility. It acknowledges that the world is bigger than your own perspective, that truth does not begin and end with your voice. When you listen, you are making room for the possibility that someone else holds a fragment of truth you do not yet possess. And when you live this way, not pretending to know everything, not filling every silence with words, you not only learn more, but you also gain the trust of others. People sense humility and they respond to it with openness. So the silent power of intentional listening is not just about being polite. It's about positioning yourself in a way that creates genuine influence. It's about realizing that control does not always come from dominance. It often comes from restraint. The person who listens deeply, who holds silence without rushing to fill it, creates the conditions for others to reveal themselves. And once they reveal themselves, the listener has access to insights, to truths, to vulnerabilities that no amount of talking could have covered. If you understand this, you can see why the greatest communicators are almost always the greatest listeners. They don't waste energy trying to dominate the room. They command the room through their attention. And when they finally do speak, their words carry more weight, precisely because they are rare, deliberate, and responsive to what has actually been said, not what they assumed would be said. So the challenge is simple but not easy. Stop equating silence with weakness. Start seeing intentional listening as the strongest form of speech. It's not passive, it's not empty. It's a deliberate act of presence, of respect, of influence. And if you can master it, you'll find that people will remember not just what you said, but how deeply you heard them. And that, in the end, is a kind of power that words alone can never achieve. When we talk about listening, it's easy to reduce it to a skill or a tactic, something you do to persuade, to negotiate, to win. And while it's true that listening has strategic benefits, its deeper significance lies in its ability to transform relationships. Because intentional listening isn't just about silence or patience, it's about presence. And presence is what people are starving for today. We live in a world of constant distraction. Think about how often conversations are interrupted by phones buzzing, by wandering thoughts, by the endless compulsion to check what's happening somewhere else. Even when two people sit across from each other, eye to eye, it's rare that both are fully there. And because this is the cultural norm, the person who breaks it, the one who chooses to listen without distraction, instantly becomes extraordinary. That kind of presence is magnetic. When you give someone your full attention, you are doing more than just hearing words. You're communicating something far more profound, that their existence has value, that in this moment, in this space, they are worth your time. That kind of recognition is deeply humanizing. And in relationships, whether romantic, professional, or familial, that is the foundation of trust. You can say all the right words, you can make all the right promises, but if you fail to listen, those words will collapse under the weight of neglect. Think about conflict for a moment. Most conflicts don't escalate because of the actual issue at hand. They escalate because neither side feels heard. The louder people get, the more they repeat themselves, not because they enjoy shouting, but because they're desperate for recognition. You can see this in families, in politics, even in workplaces. And what's fascinating is how quickly the temperature of a conflict drops when one party finally chooses to listen, not just to nod or pretend, but to truly attend to the other person's concerns. In that moment, the energy shifts, defensiveness softens, solutions become possible. The relationship begins to repair itself. But intentional listening goes beyond resolving conflict. It strengthens the very fabric of connection. When you're present with someone, you invite them to reveal more of themselves than they normally would. People open up when they sense and genuine interest. They move past the surface level pleasantries into the deeper territory of fears, hopes, and values. And once you've entered that territory with someone, the relationship transforms, is no longer shallow. It carries depth, meaning weight, and this depth is what sustains relationships through hardship. Now, the difficulty is that presence demands sacrifice. To be fully present means to silence your inner dialogue for a time. It means putting aside your own opinions, your own anxieties, your own craving for attention. That's uncomfortable because it feels like surrendering control. But paradoxically, this surrender is what allows the relationship to grow stronger. When you make room for another person in that way, they sense your authenticity. They feel safe, and safety is what allows trust to take root. Philosophically, you could argue that intentional listening is an act of love. Not necessarily romantic love, but the broader form of love that acknowledges and affirms another person's existence. To listen is to say, I accept you as you are, right now, without judgment, without distraction. That kind of affirmation has the power to heal wounds that words cannot. In many cases, people don't need advice or solutions. They need to be heard. They need someone to bear witness to their struggles. And when that happens, even without answers, they often walk away lighter, stronger, more whole. It's worth reflecting on this in your own life. Ask yourself, when was the last time you gave someone your full attention? Without glancing at a screen, without drifting into your own thoughts? And just as important, when was the last time someone gave that to you? Chances are, those moments are rare, and because they are rare, you remember them. You remember the teacher who stayed after class and listened. You remember the friend who sat with you through grief without trying to fix it. You remember the colleague who took your ideas seriously when no one else did. Those moments shape us, often more than the grand speeches or clever advice we've been given. This is why intentional listening is not merely a communication skill, it's a moral practice. It demands humility, patience, and generosity. It asks you to put aside your own need to be heard long enough to hear someone else. And when you do that consistently, you change the nature of your relationships. They become less transactional and more genuine, less fragile, and more resilient. So if the first power of listening is influence, the second is transformation. Influence may give you authority, but transformation gives you connection, and human beings cannot thrive without connection. We wither in isolation. We suffer when our voices echo unheard. But when someone listens with presence, isolation breaks. Suffering lightens. Bonds strengthen. This is not easy, but it is necessary. If you want stronger families, if you want healthier workplaces, if you want friendships that endure, you must learn to listen with intention. And not just occasionally, not just when it benefits you, but as a discipline, as a way of life. Because in a world addicted to noise and distraction, presence is revolutionary. So the invitation is simple. In your next conversation, resist the impulse to dominate, to advise, to impress. Instead, listen. Listen not as a strategy, but as an act of recognition, as an act of presence. And watch what happens, because in the end, it's not the words we say that others remember most. It's how deeply we made them